Thank you. Oh, hi, Gemma.
Hi, how are we doing?
I'm good. It's so weird, but I can see you. I know you can't see me. Well, I tell you what, Gemma, this is the first time I've done a fireside chat with a screen. But thank you so much, Gemma, for joining us. Just way of intro, Gemma, I'm just going to share with everyone here a little bit about Purplebricks and yourself, if that's okay, before we kick off. So thank you for joining Gemma and I this afternoon even. So this year, Purplebricks turned 10, at least they turned 10 since they were founded. And in a decade, they've established themselves as the UK's #1 estate agency brand, commanding a dominant share of a fragmented market. Constructing an innovative, industry-disrupting and market-leading brand in this period is no easy feat. And the digital-first disruptor of Purplebricks shows no sign of slowing down either, and we will come on and talk about that in a sec. But they're now on a mission to shake off their low-fees reputation and reposition themselves as UK's key tech-based estate agency and more than double their share of home sales nationwide to 2025. But, and this is what we'll come on to share, is undergoing this brand overhaul requires insight, and insight, of course, requires data. So Gemma is here. Gemma is the head of brand for Purplebricks, who's going to be joining me, Natasha from to talk a bit about how Purplebricks have relied on the strong foundations of data and why data sits at their heart to reposition the brand. And in full transparency, of course, if it wasn't obvious, Gemma is my client and we do work together. So just to get that out there. So Gemma, thank you. So before we kind of move on to the data piece, which is obviously why we're here and everybody's here listening to us, but can you just give us some context about Purplebricks and why you're looking to reposition the brand at this stage?
Thank you, Natasha, for an amazing setup. And yes, apologies again, I can't be there in person, but yes, I got the dreaded T word in the last week, so I'm in COVID isolation at the moment. But from Purplebricks' perspective, we've been on a really interesting journey as a brand, and with that setup, Natasha, obviously, we've achieved a lot in a very short space of time. So we are now one of the most recognised brands in the UK. So we don't have a challenge really from a brand awareness perspective. Our brand awareness is around 93%. So most people know about Purplebricks. What we have a challenge with as a brand is around real kind of active consideration. So whilst we've achieved and we can pat ourselves on the back, which hopefully that if you've all seen the new Mo Gilligan campaign where we're talking about being Britain's biggest estate agent brand, but that is in a backdrop really of a marketplace that is littered with lots of local high street agents who have bricks and mortar presence on the high street. And for those that know about Purplebricks, we've got a hybrid presence essentially. So our local estate agents are based in the high street shops, but they are in your communities, and we've obviously got the benefit of our technology. So really, in terms of one of our key challenges when you're coming in terms of active consideration is how we can start to create awareness of all of those great, amazing brand proof points, because that we've still seen through the insights that we've done, the research that we've done, that whilst people know about Purplebricks, there are a lot of misconceptions. So with that consideration, people are starting to go, well, actually, do you have local estate agents that work for you? Aren't you just a portal like Rightmove or Zoopla? Which we're not, we do. We've got 650 local estate agents, experienced estate agents dotted around the country. And then there's our pricing model as well. So we're a bit different to high street agents because we don't charge commission. But because we have a fee where you pay up front, there's also questions around, well, are you motivated to get my property sold? So this is why our content strategies have been incredibly key for us really, of how we can start to dispel a lot of those myths that are around the brand that have developed over the last couple of years. And how we can create local battlegrounds as well, because whilst we don't have a bricks and mortar presence in those communities, there are really clever tools that we've worked on with to enable that we to ensure that we've got a local media presence in the areas where it matters.
Thanks, Gemma. I think, so you just mentioned kind of the tools that you're working with us on. So if you wouldn't mind just talking maybe a bit about the journey that we're on. Obviously, we've just started making some inroads with full funnel modelling to really help drive that awareness as well as the conversion of the customers. And actually, really importantly for you and us, of course, giving that voice in the boardroom. So if you could just talk a bit maybe just about the journey that we've been on together.
Yeah, that's yeah. Thank you so much for that. And I think there's 2 points I want to talk about really from a data perspective. So first of all, you've got an incredibly strong data team at So Sam, who's the head of analytics, has worked on the whole full funnel modelling process for us over the course of the last year. And when we look at the kind of efficacy of our channels, it's really great being able to validate that back to our exec, just where the business is driven from. So we're a brand, like I say, we've got 93% awareness, but we're a brand that's built ourselves on broadcast marketing, which actually, when we look at the efficacy of our channels, TV and radio continue to be our highest channels in terms of the volume of instructions that they drive for the business. But one of the things that we've been working on with Sam is how we can start to infuse the FFM process into our budget planning process. So there's some alignment, which I'm sure many of you will go through this experience yourself, to make sure that when we get the data through from an FFM perspective, that is helping inform our decisions that we make. So we're in the process now of aligning for our H1 when we do a reforecast in the autumn, and for our financial year next year. So that's what Sam and the finance team are working with together from a UM perspective.
And what about Seller Scouter? Can we touch on that briefly? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so when we talk about those local battlegrounds, actually really how can we start to penetrate locally, and what does that local kind of footprint look like? So UM built as a tool over the course of the last year. This has been a collaborative effort really to make sure we've got all of the right data inputs going into this tool to look at where are those opportunities on a local level. So it's infused data such as Rightmove data, so for us looking at very kind of local Rightmove market share data, where are our strongholds for us as a brand, where are the opportunities for us to kind of penetrate more extensively, more locally. But it's got some other clever tools within it as well. So one of the things that we undertook last year was a big customer segmentation project, because whilst there might be lots of volume opportunity within an area, what the tool has now been able to do for us for this financial year is infuse all of that customer segmentation data into the tool. So I can look now at an area where, gosh, that looks like a huge amount of volume opportunity that's being driven, but that might be in an area where the customers have got a much lower propensity to using us. So it started to really change some areas of focus for us, and that also helps in terms of our sales focus as well. So it's not just the marketing tool, but looking operationally, where do we think our footprint needs to be, where do we need to do basically our hiring strategy to make sure we've got more agents in the areas where we know that we've got a higher opportunity to penetrate. But also from a kind of media activation perspective, they've infused things like kind of local outdoor media inventory into that tool, so I can look at, right, is that a good area in terms of customer demand, but also is that a good area for us in terms of how we can activate from a media perspective within those postcodes. So, and there's still so much more we can do with that tool, but we're starting to we'll see benefits with that certainly through the start of this financial year.
Great, thank you. And before I ask anyone if they have any specific questions for you, Gemma, kind of in terms of the journey that you're on, can we touch a bit on what's next? Because that's kind of always the big question, isn't it? You've talked about some of the journey, you've talked about some of the tools that we've been using, you've talked about why, obviously, data is so important to Purplebricks and the ambition, but can you maybe bring to life a bit about the plans to accelerate that growth through this data-led and audience-first approach, which you have touched on, but just kind of, and maybe give a bit of a taster to what's coming next, or where you want to be next, what's kind of on the roadmap for yourself and your team.
No, thank you. And I think I'm sure other brands have faced this challenge as well. When you look at segmentation, it's great when you have amazing pen portraits of your target customers, but how do you start to translate that into an environment where it actually actively means something? So we've been working with UM now over a period of months really to look at how we can start to infuse that segmentation data into our media strategy. So we're now at the stage now where, as of this month actually, it's a live project, so it's kind of hot off the press. This is the first time we started to look at, certainly from a BVOD perspective, now all of our BVOD inventory is targeted specifically at the audiences that have got the highest propensity to using us. So we're starting to create a lot more efficiencies And certainly we're looking at rolling that out over a number of digital channels over the course of the coming months. And also another kind of development in that space as well is the relationship with and Google. So we're now looking at how we start to adapt those environments into basically our Google infrastructure as well. So when we're building out our YouTube campaigns, that the audience strategy is mirrored from a Google perspective as it is with obviously the activations we're doing with
Thank you, Gemma. I'm sure I can't actually see with those glasses on, but are there any brands in the room who are starting to go on the data journey? Does anyone have any questions for Gemma on that journey? Because I think the point is, isn't it, Gemma, that as we always talk about, we're not there yet. We're doing some really smart things, and we've got some big ambitions, but we're definitely not, we haven't got all the answers. So I guess, is there anyone kind of who's on that journey where perhaps Gemma could add some insight? Sorry, Gemma, you can't see us. That's at the moment, that's a no. Is there anything else that anyone wants to ask Gemma about Purplebricks? Or I guess they're at that interesting point, like you said, as a brand. I mean, and lots of brands go through this, it's the awareness isn't an issue, it's the why, isn't it, I guess, for want of a better expression. It's kind of, we know you, but it's like why, and that's the art, and also some of those misconceptions you talked about earlier that we're trying to kind of overcome with a kind of data-driven approach.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think in terms of what next, I guess one of the builds that's the relationship that I say between and our creative agency as well. So because of tools that you've now started to deploy for us, has enabled us to have really locally targeted messaging. So we're using a lot of tools like A Million Ads, Matterkind, for example, which enables us to look at how we're surfacing our performance in a local area. So not just the fact that we're the biggest estate agent or brand nationally, but how many homes that we're selling in your area that we can surface even programmatically through all of our digital inventory in an area. What does the local agent look like in that area? What are the local reviews, which again we're now surfacing through all of our media channels on a local level.
Yeah. And in fact, actually, Gemma, you just made me think. I was in a panel earlier, and actually, really interestingly, the conversation was around this kind of importance of locality and, community. And I think we've all seen this come through COVID, but it's definitely not something that's going to go away. So having that meaningful connection to something that is local to you, I think, is only going to become more relevant as time goes on. Gemma, we've actually got a question, sorry, because I know you can't see us. Sorry.
Okay. Your BVOD strategy, can you just talk us through that in a bit more detail? I mean, are you shifting any budget out of broadcast linear into BVOD, or are you just spending more on that?
We have stopped. Naturally, thank you for your question. And yes, in a nutshell, we are. So also we've seen, I guess, with the segmentation project we've done, and I'm sure you're probably also experiencing the same, that just with the audiences and where our audiences are, naturally through the segmentation project, we've noticed obviously that there's a lot more TV-like viewers within that. So we have got an increasing percentage of our budget now that's allocated to BVOD, but that also came out through the FFM work that we did last year, so we're able to kind of justify back to the business the reasons why. So yes, in a nutshell, we have started to kind of move a little bit more out of linear, but we're also doing a test on this at the moment, so actually looking from a kind of brand lift perspective what that's doing with in terms of the efficacy of that. So there's a bit of a test and learn approach that we've got that we can go back to the business then to look at how effective having more of just an audience first approach will be for us moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. There's one more question coming, Gemma.
Hi, Gemma. You weren't in the room, but the session beforehand was about buying diverse media, and I know this is one of UM's specialities and sweet spots. So you target obviously a mass audience. How do you make sure that you are reaching the broadest audience and those underrepresented diverse communities when you're looking at your targeting?
That's a really good question, actually, to make sure we've got that kind of, this is, for me, a lot of that is about the relationships between the agency community that we have, because whilst we do obviously have a lot of our budget that's set aside to work with directly, we also have an in-house digital marketing function as well, and we work with agency providers like Google and Facebook, and I think a lot of, to make sure that we're representing and making sure that we have that footprint that's accessible to all, is a key part of that, is making sure that those relationships are strong. So we have a weekly session with our whole illustrators community to make sure that that's at the forefront from a Pepper Books perspective.
Thanks, Gemma. One more? Got one more question, Gemma.
Hello. I was just wondering how long it took you to start seeing results from using data?
Did you hear that okay, Gemma?
Yes, I did, yeah, no, good question. Well, I guess in terms of start using data, I mean, I guess we're a brand, obviously, that is built ourselves off being a kind of tech-led estate agent, but a lot of that comes to the tools that you use. So obviously we work with on an FFM basis, but we also have regular brand tracking in place as well. So one of the things that we did throughout the course of last year is we onboarded a new brand tracking agency. So I've got an always-on approach now as well, so I can make sure that not just looking at kind of the bottom line in terms of how many instructions that we're driving over the course of the short term, that we're able to kind of tap into a kind of online dashboard where I can look at on a weekly basis what that's doing in terms of my long-term brand health. So how is that affecting awareness and consideration? And we've also built that regionally as well, so I can look at the dynamics of how that's affecting consideration across the areas where we really want to target. And we've infused into that brand tracking tool as well our target segmentation. So am I shifting the dial in terms of people's perceptions of the brands? Because that's ultimately might not be hitting the bottom line in terms of the short term right now and some of the activity, but I can always go back to the business and show over periods, to answer your question, over periods of the last 12 months, I've really started to see an impact in those target segments of their propensity to using us. So certainly in terms of their active consideration of using us, which is a great tangible tool that I can then take back to the business, while we might not see that, as you can imagine, the house selling process, you move house, it's only kind of 7 to 8 years, but we can show the short-term impact that's having in terms of how people feel about the brand.
Gemma, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope I can see you next week when your test is clear, but I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you to everyone here as well for joining. Thanks, Jem. See you next week. Thank you.